Chapter 1. A life not my own. From the moment I was born, my life was never truly mine. It belonged to my parents, my relatives, and the expectations they had so carefully built around me. I was their golden child, their pride, their investment. And like any good investment, I was expected to yield results: academic success, financial stability, and ultimately, a family of my own to continue the cycle. I grew up in a traditional Indian household, where obedience was the foundation of love. There were no outright punishments, no raised hands or harsh words, just the silent weight of disappointment that crushed harder than any scolding ever could. So, I did what was expected of me. I studied relentlessly, topped my classes, and never strayed from the carefully planned path my parents had paved for me. While other kids rebelled, fell in love, made mistakes, and explored their youth, I remained firmly inside the walls of duty and responsibility. There was no room for distractions. Dating was out of the question. What was the point when my marriage would be arranged? I graduated college at the top of my class, but before I could step into my future, fate intervened. The accident. I don't remember much of the accident, just the screeching of tires, the blinding headlights, and the sensation of flying before everything went black. When I woke up in the hospital, my body ached in ways I didn't think possible. My parents were there, their faces etched with worry. The doctor's voice was calm but firm as he delivered the news. "You'll recover, but there's some damage." I listened in stunned silence as he explained that due to internal injuries, I would never be able to have children. I was 21. For most men in my country, this would have been a devastating blow, a death sentence to their lineage, a mark of shame. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I felt nothing. I had never wanted children. If anything, the news was freeing. A secret I would carry alone, a final act of defiance against the life that had been planned for me. I never told my family. They knew about the accident, but they never questioned beyond what they needed to know. I recovered, finished my degree, and moved on. Life went back to normal, or so I thought. Chapter 2. The first defiance. The moment I landed a high-paying job through campus placements, my parents sat me down, their faces glowing with pride. But beneath their smiles, I sensed something else: expectation. "It's time to think about marriage," my mother said gently, as if she were easing me into the idea. My father nodded. "You're successful now. The next step is settling down, starting a family." I had anticipated this conversation. What I hadn't anticipated was the sheer weight of saying no. "I'm not ready," I said, keeping my voice calm. Their expressions shifted. My mother's smile froze, and my father's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" my mother asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I just started working. I want to focus on myself." My father's hands clenched. "This is how life works. You study, you get a job, you get married. There's nothing to figure out." For the first time, I saw them not as my loving parents, but as architects trying to construct my life without my consent. "No," I repeated. The battle lasted for weeks. They tried everything: guilt, anger, silent treatment. My mother wept about how she had done everything for me, how all she wanted was to see me happy. My father accused me of being selfish, of forgetting my responsibilities, but I held my ground. Then, as if by some miracle, they gave up, or so I thought. Chapter 3. A Fool's Hope. After COVID hit, my parents stopped pressuring me about marriage. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I even downloaded a few dating apps, curious about the world outside of arranged matches. But nothing worked. Conversations fizzled out, and connections felt forced. Then my parents did something unexpected. "There's a girl we want you to meet," my mother said one evening. "She's the daughter of a family friend." I should have been suspicious. But when I met her, everything seemed easy. Too easy. She agreed with everything I said. She never disagreed, never voiced her own opinions. If I liked fishing, so did she. If I hated certain foods, she hated them too. At first, I thought she was just being polite, but soon, it felt unsettling. I wanted her to express herself, to have her own interests. But she always said the same thing. I like whatever you like. When I told her I never wanted kids, she simply nodded. That's fine, she said. That should have been a red flag. In my country, finding someone who willingly agreed to a child-free life was nearly impossible. But I was naive. I thought I had found someone who truly understood me. We dated for a few months. I took things slow, careful not to rush into anything. Then, a month ago, we had sex for the first time. I used protection. I was always careful. The next day, she started ghosting me. Chapter 4. The Lie. Her texts became short. Okay. K. One-word answers that made my stomach churn. Had I done something wrong? Had I been that bad in bed? I decided to give her space, hoping things would go back to normal. Then yesterday, her entire family showed up at my house. They said she was pregnant, and the father was me. For a moment, the world spun. I felt the floor tilting beneath me, my lungs refusing to draw breath. Pregnant? Impossible. I had used protection. And the accident. I wasn't just careful. I was physically incapable of having children. Yet I said nothing. I just stood there as they spoke of marriage, of responsibilities, of doing the right thing. My parents looked at me expectantly, their eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name. Then it hit me. They weren't shocked. Chapter 5. The Ultimate Betrayal. I took the next day off. My boss didn't question it. I booked an appointment at a clinic for Friday, needing an official medical test to confirm what I already knew. Then, I went to the store and bought pregnancy tests. That night, I called my mother. Before I could speak, she asked, "Do you have good news?" My throat closed. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I already knew. She hesitated. Then she laughed lightly. "Oh, nothing." She was lying. I hung up and cried, a grown man sobbing like a child for the first time since 8th grade, because I finally understood. This was a setup. Chapter 6. The Panic Sets. And as her family stood in front of me, their expressions filled with a mix of expectancy and pride, my mind raced. The idea of marriage had always been an abstract concept, something I had seen in movies or heard about from relatives. But now it was real. And it wasn't about the joy of finding a soulmate. It was about a set of obligations, a future I hadn't chosen, and a mistake I couldn't even remember making. Pregnant. The word echoed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't escape. I had been careful. I had used protection. My body had been permanently altered by the accident. There was no way I could father a child. But here they were, staring at me, waiting for my reaction, expecting me to embrace a life I never wanted. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to react. My body felt numb, my mouth dry. I wanted to collapse on the floor to scream, but instead I just stood there, staring blankly at the faces around me. My mother, who had always been the source of love and affection in my life, now looked at me with a gleam of hope in her eyes. She saw this as the culmination of everything she had worked for, her only son, finally stepping into the role he was born to play. A good husband, a good father, a man who would carry on the family name. But I was suffocating under the weight of it all. I had never asked for this. I had never wanted any of this. "Do you have any plans, son?" my father asked, his voice low but commanding, the way it always was when he expected something from me. I couldn't bring myself to speak. All I could do was nod and give the most empty response I could muster. "We'll talk about it." His face softened for just a second, a brief flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. My mother leaned in, her voice laced with emotion. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered, though it felt more like a command. this is the right thing for all of us. I wanted to tell her it wasn't. I wanted to shout that this wasn't my choice, that I was being forced into a mold that never fit me, but I couldn't. Not in front of them. Not with her family watching with such hopeful eyes. As they spoke of marriage plans, of when the ceremony would take place, of where it would be, I felt detached from the conversation. It was as though I were watching myself from a distance, a puppet on strings, unable to break free from the pull of their demands. The world spun faster, and I felt like I was losing control. "Can we talk privately?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But it was too late. Her family was already discussing wedding venues and traditions. They were treating this like a celebration, as if this was the happiest day of their lives. I couldn't take it anymore. "I'll be right back," I muttered, and without waiting for a response, I walked into my room, away from the noise and the suffocating pressure. I shut the door behind me and sank into the chair beside my desk. The room felt too small, too confined. It was like the walls were closing in on me, trapping me in a life I didn't want. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone and called the only person who might understand. My boss. I needed time off. "You all right?" she asked, her voice calm. I need a day. Maybe more," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'm not feeling well."
She hesitated, but then agreed. "Take care of yourself. We'll handle things here." The relief I felt was fleeting. It wasn't a solution. It didn't fix anything. The weight of what I was about to face hit me harder than ever. How could I tell them the truth? How could I tell them that I couldn't father a child? That I wasn't physically capable of becoming the man they wanted me to be? Chapter 7. The Confrontation. The next morning, I asked her to come alone. I needed answers, and I needed to make sure I wasn't imagining things. This was too big to just let slide. If she really was pregnant, we needed to know for sure. But she insisted on bringing her family, and that, in itself, felt like a red flag. I tried to prepare myself for what was coming, but I was far from ready. When they arrived, I greeted them at the door with forced politeness, ushering them into the living room. I could feel the tension in the air. Her parents were eager to discuss the future, and mine were anxiously waiting for me to take charge of the situation. But I wasn't in control. Not anymore. I asked them to wait outside while I spoke to her privately. Her parents looked confused, even offended, but they left without protest. Once they were gone, I turned to her, my mind racing. "You need to prove you're pregnant," I said flatly. "Show me the test results." Her eyes widened in shock, and for the first time, I saw a flash of something other than the calm compliance she had shown me before. She started to protest, to shout, but I cut her off. "I'm not playing games with you. If you're pregnant, show me the proof." She froze. Then she did something I didn't expect. She screamed. I wasn't sure what to do, but I just stood there, frozen in place. I had never seen her like this. The anger, the frustration, it all came pouring out in that moment. She stormed out of the room and called her parents in. I could hear them yelling from the other side of the door. My mind was racing, but my thoughts couldn't catch up to the chaos that was unfolding. I had to make sense of it all. I had to protect myself from the mess that was now consuming my life. In the silence that followed, I realized that I had never truly known her. Not really. She had played a role, a part that fit perfectly into the life my parents had designed for me. But now, I was faced with the harsh reality that I was being manipulated. Chapter 8. The Final Truth. An hour later, my parents arrived. The tension in the air thickened, and it felt like I was trapped in a room full of accusations and lies. I wasn't sure who had orchestrated this web of deceit, but the truth was clear now. This wasn't about me. It was about them. Her family had left, and it was just us now. The confrontation that I had dreaded was finally here. I looked at my mother first, her eyes filled with concern. "What's going on, son?" I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know the truth. "She's not pregnant, is she?" I asked, my voice low but firm. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother's voice broke the stillness. "She wasn't ever pregnant, no." I felt the floor drop from beneath me. It wasn't just about the pregnancy. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about the betrayal of everything I had ever known. My parents, my family, they had planned this. They had orchestrated the entire thing. My mother's voice wavered as she explained, "We wanted you to marry her because it was time. We wanted to make sure you settled down, that you fulfilled your responsibilities." Responsibilities? I choked out. What about my life? What about what I want? "You don't understand," my father said, his voice cold and distant. "We know what's best for you. You're getting older. You're expected to give us grandchildren. We chose her because we knew she would agree to everything." I felt the walls close in again, this time with a finality that left no room for escape. "You were never going to have a choice," my mother added softly. "We were always going to make sure you did what you were supposed to do." My vision blurred, and I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything I had done for them, everything I had sacrificed, had been for this, an arranged life that had never been my own. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I had spent my whole life trying to please them, trying to live up to their expectations, and it had all been for nothing. It was the final betrayal. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. The room was silent except for the soft sound of my sobs, echoing in the otherwise still air. My body trembled as I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. But the weight of it all was unbearable. It felt like my life had shattered in an instant, and everything I had once known had been ripped away. My parents, people I had trusted my entire life, had manipulated me, controlled me, and used me to fulfill their own desires. I had always believed that family was a place of support, of unconditional love. But now, the very people I had turned to for guidance had turned into something unrecognizable. They had taken away my voice, my agency, and my future. And all for what? To force me into a life I had never wanted? A life I had fought against for as long as I could remember? I wiped my face with the back of my hand, the tears blurring my vision. My mother's gentle voice, which I had once found so comforting, now felt cold and distant. "You don't understand, son," she said softly, her voice trembling with what sounded like guilt. "We did what we thought was best for you." "I don't need you to do what's best for me," I shouted, the words escaping before I could stop them. "I needed you to let me live my own life." There was a painful pause before my father spoke, his voice steady but harsh. "We've been trying to help you, but you've never listened. You're so focused on your own plans that you can't see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture," I repeated, the bitterness in my voice rising. "The bigger picture is me being trapped in a life I didn't ask for, with people I didn't choose, doing things I never wanted. What part of that is helping me?" My father's face reddened, and for a moment I thought he might yell back. But instead, he just looked at me like I was some kind of disappointment. His eyes, once filled with pride, now seemed to reflect only frustration and resentment. "We did what was right," he said, a cold finality in his tone. "And one day, you'll realize that." But I didn't want to realize that. I didn't want to accept that the life I had worked so hard to carve out for myself, one of independence and freedom, had been an illusion. My parents had never asked me what I wanted. They had never once taken my feelings into account. They had only seen me as a tool to fulfill their own desires, a puppet in their grand plan. I felt a deep ache in my chest, one that was more than just emotional. It was physical, like a wound that had been opened, raw and bleeding. And it was all their fault. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered through clenched teeth. "What do you mean?" My mother's voice was sharp now, defensive. "I mean, I'm done. I can't live this lie anymore." I stood up, my knees feeling weak beneath me. I walked over to the door and opened it wide, the cold air rushing in, as though it were a reminder of the reality I had to face now. "You need to leave, both of you," I said, my voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of everything I was feeling. They both looked at me, shocked, and for a moment I thought they might protest. But they didn't. Instead, my father's eyes flickered to my mother, and I could see the silent communication between them. He turned back to me, his lips pressed in a thin line, his eyes filled with something, anger, disappointment, but mostly it was resignation. "I'm sorry, son. We thought we were doing what was best for you. But I wasn't interested in hearing any more of their excuses." "I don't want your apologies," I said sharply. "I just want you to leave." The finality of my words hung in the air, and without another word, they both turned and left. The door shut behind them with a soft thud, and I was left standing alone, my heart heavy with a mix of anger, betrayal, and sadness. I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling with the aftershocks of the confrontation. The tears came again, but this time I didn't try to stop them. I let them flow freely, as though my body needed this release, needed to let go of the pain I had been carrying for so long. I had spent years trying to please them, trying to live up to their expectations, but in the end, it was never enough. And now, I realized with a painful clarity, it would never be. I had lost them, and in many ways, I had lost myself. Chapter 10. Finding my voice. The days following the confrontation were a blur. I had taken a leave from work to process everything, but honestly, I didn't know where to begin. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My mind was constantly racing, replaying every conversation, every moment with my parents, every lie I had been fed. I spent most of my time in my room, staring out the window, trying to make sense of the chaos inside my head. But there was no clarity, only noise. I needed to find a way to get my life back on track, to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been taken from me. But how? I had always been the good son, the obedient child. I had always followed the rules, always done what was expected of me. But now that I had broken free from their control, I was left with nothing but uncertainty. One day, after hours of brooding, I decided to take action. I called my therapist, someone I had been seeing on and off for a few years.
She had always been the one to help me untangle my thoughts, to help me find a sense of balance. "I need help," I said, my voice raw. "I don't know what to do anymore." She listened patiently as I poured out my heart, telling her everything, the accident, the betrayal, the manipulation, the broken trust. "You've been carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders, haven't you?" she said softly. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "This is your life," she continued, "and it's your choice. You don't have to live by anyone else's rules anymore. You don't have to carry their expectations with you." I didn't know what I expected to hear, but something about her words felt like a lifeline, something to hold on to as I floated in this sea of confusion. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. The emotional trauma I had suffered would take time to heal, and the damage to my relationship with my parents would never be fully repaired. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back. I couldn't let them control my life any longer. As I looked out the window, I saw the world outside, wide, expansive, full of possibilities. For the first time, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like a prisoner to their expectations. I was free, and no one was going to take that from me. The climax. Unmasking the truth. It had been days since the confrontation with my parents, and yet I still felt the remnants of their betrayal festering deep within me. Every time I tried to move forward, the weight of what they'd done pulled me back. My life, once a path I had carefully constructed with ambition and hope, had turned into a labyrinth of deceit and lies. But today something inside me snapped. I had been working from home, trying to find a sense of normalcy, when I received an unexpected message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, with a simple subject line: "You need to see this." Curious and more than a little apprehensive, I opened the message. A single video file attached. I hesitated for a moment. Something in my gut told me not to click it, but the nagging feeling in the back of my mind urged me to. What could it possibly be? A part of me dreaded the answer, but another part of me, my anger, my confusion, my need for truth, wanted to know. I clicked the file. The video began with a shaky, grainy image, but then it focused on a familiar face, my mother standing in what looked like a well-lit room talking to someone just off camera. "It's all set," she said in a hushed voice. "He's taking the bait. He thinks the girl is pregnant, and once he marries her, there will be no going back. The pressure will be too much and he'll never leave her." My heart sank. The words were like a dagger to my chest. My own mother was part of a scheme to trap me, to control me. The woman I had trusted with my deepest feelings, with my dreams, was not the person I thought she was. But it didn't stop there. The video continued. Another figure came into view. A man I didn't recognize at first. Then the camera zoomed in and I froze. It was her father, the man who had been part of the plan to force me into a life I didn't want. "Good," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Once he's married her, you'll have control over him. He won't be able to escape. He'll be stuck with the family and with us." I felt the ground beneath me shift. My breath came in short, rapid bursts, and I thought I might collapse right there in my chair. My mind raced, trying to process the information, trying to piece together the layers of manipulation that had been unfolding right before my eyes. How long had they been plotting this? Since before I met her? And then, the video took an even darker turn. My mother leaned closer to the camera, her eyes glinting with a cold, calculating intensity. "You were right about him," she said, her voice now low and menacing. "He's too attached to the idea of success. He thinks his career is everything. We just need to make sure he doesn't have a choice. The perfect plan will force him into the life we want for him." I stumbled backward, the walls around me spinning. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. The betrayal was so deep, so unimaginable that I could barely comprehend it. I had never seen my mother like this. This wasn't the woman who had kissed me goodnight when I was a child, the woman who had always told me I could be anything I wanted. This was a stranger. Then, the message continued. My phone buzzed with a new text, one from the same mysterious number. "They're not finished. They're coming for you. Your life, your freedom, everything, but you have a chance to stop it." The words felt like a lifeline and a threat all in one. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my pulse.
message didn't just reveal what had been happening behind the scenes. It was a warning.
The people who had orchestrated this trap weren't done. My parents, the woman I thought I could trust, and her family, they were still in the shadows, ready to pounce when I least expected it. And worse, the text ended with a chilling final sentence. "The game isn't over, but the clock is ticking. If you don't act now, you'll lose everything." My mind went into overdrive. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the people I had once believed had my best interests at heart. The facade had crumbled, and now I was standing in the ruins of my former life with only one option left: fight back. I knew I had to take action, but how? How could I expose the truth? How could I take back control of my life from the people who had manipulated me for so long? But then, a thought crossed my mind. What if I used their own game against them? The realization hit me like a freight train. I didn't have to play by their rules anymore. They thought they had me cornered, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I would make sure they felt the consequences of their actions. The plan. I had to move quickly. The clock was ticking, and I wasn't sure how much time I had before they would try to push their plan into full motion. I called a trusted friend who had connections in the media, someone I knew would help me expose the truth. They agreed to help without hesitation, and within hours, we had a plan in place. I wasn't just going to reveal my parents' betrayal, I was going to expose them to the world, show them for what they truly were. But there was more. The girl, the one they had tried to push me into marrying, had to be a part of this too. I wasn't going to let her become a pawn in their game anymore. She had no idea the depths to which her family had sunk. She deserved to know the truth, and if I had to force it out of her, I would. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and they could destroy everything. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready to fight. The final showdown. The night before I was to make my move, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the screen. My phone buzzed once more. Another message. "It's too late. You can't win. We're always one step ahead." The words felt like a threat, a warning. But this time, they didn't scare me. I smiled, a cold, calculating smile. It was time to turn the tables. The day of the confrontation arrived. I stood in front of my family, my heart pounding, my mind clear. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, it had all led to this. My parents, the woman they had tried to force me to marry, and the entire system they had built to control me. They were all about to find out what happens when you push someone too far. The cameras were rolling, and I was ready. I had one chance to expose them all for what they truly were. Thank you to everyone who listened to this story. Please leave a comment on this, like, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Also, this is my first full video, so sorry if anything is wrong, so please support, and every time I will improve.